Right, hello and good afternoon everybody, and welcome to Segadunum and to the first day of the CBA Festival of Archaeology. I'm delighted to be here talking to you, and what I want to talk to you about today is my journey to walk Hadrian's Wall, which I did in May this year. And I'm going to explain a bit of the background, and then I'm going to explain what I think I learnt and experienced on the way, and just really have a conversation about how that whole process over 9 days has totally changed my perception of Hadrian's Wall. But I suppose to start off with is, who am I and why am I talking to you? Why do you want to listen to what I might have to say? Well, I am the Executive Director of the Council for British Archaeology. I took over the post in April 2002. In April 2020. Let's get this absolutely right. This is called COVID brain. I took over in April 2020, and I thought it'd be really good not to start on the 1st of April, so I started on the 2nd of April. In that entire process, and I didn't actually see any of my staff for 18 months, and we literally had to move to a remote way of working. And so what is the CBA? We're a charity that promotes archaeology and promotes public participation in archaeology. We really like to encourage as many people as possible to use archaeology as a way of asking questions about the places they actually live in, the places they go to school in, the places they work in, and parts of their entire lived experience. We run some really important things, the Festival of Archaeology. We run the Young Archaeologists Club, that has 80 branches across the country. We're a membership organisation. We're actually one of the 6 national amenity societies, which actually means within planning legislation we have a role commenting on applications to change listed buildings. So important things that we actually do across there. But our message is really about participation and helping as many people as possible get involved in archaeology. And obviously in 2000, we had to put in 2020, we had to put the entire festival online. We couldn't have any in-person activities. So we went to an entirely digital festival. In 2021, we actually moved to what we ended up calling a hybrid festival. So partially online, partially in person. And that hybrid model is one we actually wanted to stick with. Last year's festival, we actually called Exploring Local Places. So again, it was a sort of post-COVID idea of helping people get out and explore the places around them. And one of the things I did is I walked around the country for 16 days. I covered 100 miles on foot, and I decided to do it for charity. The charity I chose to do it for was Macmillan Nurses, because my mum had passed away in 2020, and she'd been cared for by the most amazing Macmillan nurse. And I decided to call my walking and talking your way. And my 100th mile was here at Sycamore Gap. Okay, sort of fortuitously, slightly planned, but I managed to get in my miles. That was actually on day 15 of the festival. And when I was there, it started me thinking about, would I actually like to walk Hadrian's Wall? What might that actually be like? We had already started to think about what theme we wanted for the 2022 Festival of Archaeology, and we decided the theme would be journeys. And then completely fortuitously, in a number of other conversations, we actually learned that this year is Hadrian's Wall 1900. Okay? And when we started to put those things together, I know Jane Gibson, who's the chair of the World Heritage, Hadrian's Wall World Heritage site. We started to have a conversation about how could we link these two things together. So how could the CBA and the Festival of Archaeology celebrate Hadrian's 1900, and how could we actually focus some of our activity? And where that led us to was Segadunum. So again, we were really clear we wanted to come here because of the location where it is. It's not one of your famous pretty bits of Hadrian's Wall. This is somewhere where we really feel we can actually have an interesting conversation about archaeology, how you get involved and what you actually do with it. So the journey to actually me being here standing to you is well over 12 months old and has involved conversations with an awful lot of people. But I was really quite keen to do some charity fundraising again this year, but my team were absolutely clear. They said, Neil, you can do that, but you're not allowed to do it during the Festival of Archaeology because it's just too busy. So unlike last year, what I decided to do was to do my charity walk in May, and we decided that the idea should be for me to walk the entire length of Hadrian's Wall. So that was it. It was planned. By that stage, we knew we were going to come to Segedunum, so I made a decision that I was going to walk the wall from west to east, because the idea was to take my journey to Segedunum so that I could actually present what that actually means. Now, at the time this conversation was going on, we were also having a conversation with some academics at UCL in London about the CBA's archive. The Council for British Archaeology was founded in 1944 out of a series of really important lectures and conferences held in London to start to discuss what the opportunities for archaeology were after the Second World War. Okay, so the Congress of Archaeological Societies hosted these meetings, and out of it, the CBA was born. And we're having a discussion what to do with this archive, because it's really, really interesting. And in that conversation, I came across Dr. Amara Thornton. And now Amara is really interested in studying the careers of early female archaeologists. She runs a project called Beyond Notables, where she actually researches these archaeologists and then she presents the material around them. Because in many ways, they're the great unhidden workforce in archaeology. A lot of the time they sit behind the scenes, but so they don't appear in the official publications of archaeological excavations, but they're all in the journals, they're all in the finds, documentation that you actually see behind them, and they are really quite fascinating. And so I told Amara that I was wanting to walk Hadrian's Wall, and she said, well, clearly, obviously, Neil, you're going to follow the guidebook of Jessie Mothersole. And I'm like, who is Jessie Mothersole? And so Jessie Mothersole turns out to be an archaeologist who is operating in the 1920s. And in 1920, she decides to walk Hadrian's Wall. And she publishes one of the most important and early guidebooks on Hadrian's Wall in 1922. So this year, not only is it the 19th, 100th anniversary of Hadrian's Wall, it's the 100th anniversary of Jessie Mothersole's publication, Hadrian's Wall. And so Amara and I had a conversation that we should follow her guidebook. Let's use her guidebook as our guide. But not only was Jessie an archaeologist, she also was an artist. And so she illustrated her book herself. And what she then did is in London, she held an art exhibition where she sold all her paintings. Okay? And she sold the paintings as a way of raising profile for the book. But that means we don't know where any of the paintings are. Okay, so we have the illustrations in her book, but we don't know her paintings. So Amara and I came up with an idea whereby we would, through me walking the wall, using Twitter, effectively have a conversation, A, to see if I could find the locations she painted and see if they look the same, what they're like today, but B, also to see if we could get the Twitter world to actually find any of her. That's what we set up. Now, I was going to do it for charity, but as you know, in February this year, the world sort of turned on its head, and I was going to do it for the original charities I did last year, but I decided to change that before I started the walk. And so my charity fundraising this year was in support of the British Red Cross Ukraine appeal. Okay, so again, a really interesting scenario going on about how do you actually talk about conflict when I'm out effectively enjoying myself, and what might that mean in sort of some of the storytelling that I actually wanted to do when I was doing it. But again, it was a really straightforward conversation just to present that, to say this is why I'm doing it, and then see where that conversation actually got me. So I set off on Friday the 6th of May from York. I decided I was going to do it with a backpack and a tent, and I'm walking the lot. Okay, and I decided no one's going to drive me there, so I literally used public transport to get myself to Bowness-on-Solway, Wallsend in the west. You know, you do all the classic things. We cross the Tyne, we go out. My first glimpse of Hadrian's Wall was from the train as I zoomed past Mile Castle 43, I think it is. And then I ended up on a bus, and I ended up in the middle of nowhere at Bowness-on-Solway. And then literally Saturday the 7th, I started walking east, and my destination was Segedunum in 9 days. And here's the walk. I used Strava on my wrist, It recorded my entire walk, so I know exactly how far I went. Apparently the walk's 84 miles long. Well, I ended up doing 93.5 miles. Okay, there is a reason. I'll come back to the reason why I did all those extra miles, and you can actually make out some of the little extra bits here. I nipped down to Lanercost Priory because why not? It's beautiful. I had breakfast there one day, which was absolutely fantastic, just sitting outside it. But again, this technology was absolutely fantastic. This all gets recorded on my Just Giving page. And again, it's a really nice record of actually the walk I did. And I just love the bit. Some of it is just so straight. I only really realised this when I put these slides together like this yesterday. But that was my approach to get the whole wall done and do it in a straight line. And very importantly, when I got to Newcastle, I kept on the line of the road. So I didn't follow where the National Trail goes, which is down to the river and along. I kept straight on through. And that was fascinating. And I literally did camp. I was carrying my food. I was carrying my coffee because I need a good proper cup of coffee in the mornings. And I can tell you, mornings in a tent like this are the best place to be in the world because it was absolutely stunning. This night, it rained all night, actually. But then you got this amazing view in the morning. And yes, I literally was working first thing in the mornings most days because I was still working and talking and communicating to people what I actually meant. But what did I do when I did this? You know, in a sense, I was just walking a footpath. But was I? And what I found in doing this is a whole series of stories and interwoven experiences that started to come out. So when we first came to Segedunum, the one thing I was told about Segedunum was the Segedunum duck. Yeah? So there's a piece of pottery downstairs, you can look at it and it's got a duck on it. The duck motif of Segedunum. It's really, really important. Okay? So the thing that I absolutely love is on my first day, I wake up in my tent and these two fine ducks come up and say hello to me. So literally I'm in Wallsend, Bowness-on-Solway, and I'm faced with two ducks and I am walking the wall to find two more ducks. This is a duck-to-duck wall. Okay? And it was amazing how these narratives start popping up and jumping about. Day one, I'm walking along and I have arranged to meet the owners of Drumbruff Castle. Okay, and Drumbruff Castle sits on a Roman fort near Bowness-on-Solway. It's a really incredible landscape. It's very subtle. It's very, 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 very flat. And so when you get hills, they're really, really meaningful. And you can understand why the Romans actually went there. So I got there and I met the owners and they were absolutely lovely. But the thing that absolutely captivated me when I got to Drumbruff Castle wasn't anything Roman. It was the fact that Alan, the farmer who lives here, had a fantastic collection of landrains. Absolutely brilliant collection of landrains and a really fantastic collection of bricks. And Alan and I just started to have this conversation about bricks and landrains and what it actually meant. Yeah, and I could see his wife saying, do you not want to talk about the archaeology? Well, what was really fascinating about this, of course, Alan had spent most of his early life as a farmer lifting and relaying landrains. So what this person did not know about the landscape, the topography, where the wet soil is, where the dry soil is, isn't actually worth knowing. And actually, it was through the landrain conversation that we started to talk about why did the Romans put their fort on this hill? What do we think that was actually there? So in a sense, Alan's knowledge, that lived experience knowledge, is fundamental for us as archaeologists in understanding how landscapes actually work. But there was one even better story. Alan's grandmother actually met Jessie Mothersole in 1920 and gave her a cup of tea. And that experience is actually written into Jessie's book. So she writes about going to Drumbruff Castle. And that started a whole another conversation between Alan, Sarah, and the experience of what that actually means. They had not got a copy of this book. I can tell you they do now have a copy of Jessie's book. Yeah? And they've been exploring what that actually means. So again, this really important thing about lived experience and what does that actually mean. So again, it was a really incredible start to this journey, was to actually get this local knowledge come pouring through in everything that I was encountering. Now, my sister had tweeted to me, Neil, there's this guy, Andy Frizzle. There's this guy, he's walking the wall for Alzheimer's, but he's going in the opposite direction to you. And he started on the 1st of May. So we reckon you're going to meet him. You're going to meet him on your first day. And so there's me on my phone, tweeting. I found him on Twitter, okay, and I'm tweeting him saying, I'm going to be meeting you today. And then I look up and he's literally standing right in front of me. And I say, hello, you're Alan, aren't you? And he's like, what are you? I said, oh, I'm just tweeting that I'm about to meet you. Oh, and I have just met you. And so Alan and I start to have this amazing Twitter conversation, what it's like to walk the wall, why we're doing walking the wall, and we start promoting each other's charities, and we start raising money for each other. And so what I actually found walking the wall, there was this whole community of fundraisers, and they are really amazing. So I met these other two guys, a couple of miners, Keith and Gordon. They were walking the wall in full mining clobber. Okay, so yeah, this is me, I'm 5'5", so these are tall chaps, right? And it was hot weather, yeah? And they were absolutely incredible. So then we joined up on Twitter, and we all started having an absolute big conversation. And then we actually find that you start to meet a number of the footpath rangers. And there's one footpath ranger who's called Ray Purvis. He's absolutely fantastic. But Ray loves to create these little plaques. And do you know what he does? He gives them to everybody who walks the wall for charity. There's a whole family of these plaques going on around the place. Another footpath ranger who I'll come and talk to in a bit more detail, Gary Pickles, he obviously maintains his job to actually maintain the wall, and he often has to replace the footpath signs. So he gives this one to Andy Frizzle, because Andy Frizzle is going to auction it for charity for his fundraising. Okay, and my sister bought it on that charity for me for my 51st birthday. So we'll see where it is a little bit later. But again, we're still talking. So I've been having a Twitter conversation with Andy Frizzle this morning because I've come back to the wall. And so it's really extraordinary how this community is suddenly created by this place. And then along this, you find there's all these places have communities. So again, I went to the Roman Army Museum, I went to Vindolanda, and I had the most amazing conversations with the gang at the Army Museum in Vindolanda and the Bryleys. And what was it about? It was the fact that what they do is they bring people from all over the world, they stick them in a small area, and they create a community out of them. Well, that's not dissimilar to what the Romans were doing when they brought soldiers from all over the Roman world, put them in a barracks blocks, and just left them to get on with it. And so you get this amazing synergy that actually starts happening, and this interplay between the material and the places around you and the conversations that you actually start having. And I love that. And I love that idea that actually the wall isn't anything to do about the past. It's actually this conversation we're having today in the present. And that brings me to Gary. Gary Pickles is the National Trail Footpath Ranger. So he is the guy who looks after the footpath. And he is the person solely responsible for me walking 93 miles instead of 84. Because we started having a conversation, I was due to meet him and have a day with him, but he contacted me early, and I said, oh, I'm here, and he said, Neil, did you see that when you walked past this bit of the wall? And I said, no, I didn't see that. He said, you have to go and see that. So he literally sent me back 4 miles to go and have a look at a bit of Hadrian's Wall. Okay. He then sent me all this information about how he manages the wall and what it actually means and what it takes to maintain the footpath. And he was fascinating. So what he does is he mentally breaks the wall into 5 main sections. So you have 2 lowland sections, you have 2 what you call low pasture, low arable, and then you have the upland area in the middle. Each of them have very subtle different vegetation needs, very different ecosystems. He then talks about the intersections between them. He then puts the urban areas in, and then he talks about this amazing thing called aspect. Where does the sun shine? Because that actually impacts on how you maintain this footpath. But actually what he's really talking about is actually how you perceive and experience that wall is fundamentally to do with this. How high above sea level you are changes. What the type of scenery and landscape you're going through changes your actual perception of the wall. And again, he then just took us how he actually maintains it and what he does in terms of grass cutting, in terms of the flagstones, in terms of grass repairs, just using these simple mats. And it was stunning. This is one person plus an apprentice almost maintaining that footpath on behalf of absolutely everybody. Absolutely incredible. The one thing I absolutely love are these flagstones. Anyone know the origin of those flagstones like that on footpaths? No. You do get paved trods like that. No, these are actually former mill floors from the mills, textile buildings of Lancashire and Yorkshire. And a standard conservation technique is to take those millstones that were the floors where the machinery sat, turn them upside down and use them as paths. And so when you go across these, you can actually see often little metal pins where the actual spinning machines were attached to them. So just imagine the thousands and thousands of people who actually worked in those factories, who walked on these flagstones, who never ever experienced the landscape you're now walking through, walking over the same flagstones. There's people's lives wrapped up in the very fabric and essence of what's actually around us. And so it's amazing when you start to unpick what it is you're actually seeing. The other really big thing that we actually encountered was Storm Arwen. And what was absolutely fascinating is there was no damage to the west side of Hadrian's Wall. As soon as I got over the water threshold and went to the east side, you started to see the damage of Storm Arwen everywhere. And it was incredible, the power that you were actually seeing, the trees down, the impact on the path, you know, just literally there, that's a metal gate that's been hit by a tree falling down. So again, some of this stuff was the stuff that Gary was actually trying to reflect and pick back up again. And what do you get from this? Well, Hadrian's Wall's not a static thing. It changes constantly. The environment it exists in is always changing, and we adapt and we reflect and look at that differently. And that takes me back to thinking about Jessie and Jessie Mothersole and her book and what changed in the 100 years since she walked the wall and I was actually walking the wall. So this was this exercise of using her 14 photographs and trying to find the spot where she actually took them and retake them. And it's an absolutely fascinating experience when you actually get there. So her front cover here, and this is the retaken photograph. So again, you know, it's pretty good when you actually start to look at it. Okay, except we don't have this nice sort of canoodling couple in the doorway. And we're still trying to work out what these are along the front of the river. They don't seem to be a gate or anything like that. But, you know, this is 100 years apart. This is almost pretty identical. What does that actually mean? But this wasn't the best example. When you actually looked at some of the forts, you get this. This is incredible. So this is Castle Nick, and it's almost identical in what you're actually seeing. Even the bits revealed inside the centre of the fort. And it just goes on. So Chester's bathhouse looking across the river, Housted's fort, the northern entrance. You know, even this water trough here is there. It's almost entirely, the trees are in the same place, the wall going off in the distance is in the same place. It was absolutely incredible. Oops. Sorry. And again, this is looking over to Crag Lock and the wall just drifting off into the distance, exactly as she was painting it. It's not all quite the same, so this is my famous one. This is Housted's Mile Castle, and bizarrely the wall seems to have grown in this location. So we've actually ended up with more wall, and we've actually ended up with a fence. That's a good Ministry of Works style activity going on there, I think. Clearly someone's done some fertling around and found some more of the archway and reconstructed it. Now, what about her actual paintings? Did we find any? Well, we only found one. And this was quite an extraordinary find, because I actually saw this in person and actually managed to hold it. So on day one, I'm walking along. I've just been to Drumborough Castle, and I'm due to meet a former colleague of mine, Humphrey Welfare, who lives just to the west of Carlisle. And I meet him and we're having lunch, and I talk about what I'm doing, and I say, I've got Jessie Mothersole's guidebook. Yes, Neil, I know about Jessie Mothersole. And so, well, you know, we don't know where any of the paintings are. And he said, really? We don't know anywhere in the paintings are? I said, no, we don't know any of the paintings are. He says, oh, no, that's not quite true, Neil, because look, I've actually got one. And he walks next door and he says, I've got this one. And it turns over and it's dated, and it used to be owned by F. Gerald Simpson, who was Jessie Mothersole's archaeological mentor. He owned 3 of the paintings in Oxford. Hum said he actually bought this painting in a bookshop in Carlisle. How did it get there? Where did this painting go? What's the story of this actual painting? But lovely, there it is, and it looks fantastic. You can see how the read across is absolutely amazing. This is the current location, so again, This is just on from Bird Oswald, and you can just make the wall there is here. Obviously, modern erosion where the river is you can't actually get to the exact location where she did the painting from. But it was really nice. But this is the only painting of Jessie's that we've actually located. So again, there are 13 other paintings of Hadrian's Wall out there somewhere. But it's the subtle, tiny details that I absolutely loved. She was an archaeologist and with an artist's eye, and she actually recorded things archaeologically. So if you look, this is the photograph I retook of her painting here, and what I absolutely like is you can see the courser stones dropping down one, you can see the courser stones dropping down one, 100 years apart, which I think is there's this synergy that's actually going on there. Whether that's intentional, whether that's been rebuilt like that, I don't know. But again, it's this layers of detail that are really interesting. Now, Jessie wrote her book, Walk the Wall in 1920. She wrote the book in 1922. That's when it was first published. It was republished on 4 separate occasions, and the version that I had was actually 1928. And she had a preface in it, and the preface for me is really interesting. And the reason why it is what she says is an epoch-defining event happened between 1922 and 1928. And that was Hadrian's Wall was designated as a scheduled monument in 1924. And she literally, in this text, talks about owners not now having rights over the wall. Okay, not strictly correct, because owners are still allowed to do things in that absolute landscape. But what she's actually articulating here is a change in the understanding of the significance of the wall and state intervention around its future, its management, its understanding, and what we actually make of that. Now, I was an inspector of ancient monuments for nearly 20 years, so that this was my job, would have been, to work for the Office for Works, to go and look after Hadrian's Wall. So I find this a really fascinating piece of the history of Hadrian's Wall. But for me, it goes way beyond just the wall becoming designated, because I think there's a much bigger impact that Jessie's work actually has. And the first impact to get your mind around is I think Jessie is responsible for some of the iconic imagery we now create of the wall. So here is her painting. This is it today, and this is the publicity for Hadrian's 1900. So actually, despite not being claimed, we are looking here at Hadrian's Wall through the eyes of Jessie Mothersole. And this is quite an established process of people, artists, establishing views that people then go and repeat over time. I think it's fascinating. But not everybody liked what Jessie was doing. So I bought her second book. It's called The Saxon Shore. That's one of my future walks, hopefully I'm going to do. The Saxon Shore is Kent. Okay, and in the Saxon Shore, there are a whole series of reviews of her Hadrian's Wall book. And this is what the Antiquities Journal had to say. This is a gossiping guide to a monument that the author approaches with the greatest reverence and reproduces in colour with pleasing effect. The book will have many uses for those who emulate the author's energy and make the pilgrimage on foot. Now, what I'm really struck by that is that opening thing. This is a gossipy guide. There are hundreds of other reviews. Nobody else refers to it like this except the Antiquities Journal. It's almost like it's been put to one side because, dare I say it, a female has written this, and she's taken a very distinctive approach to actually writing it. But look at this impact of Jessie. She's actually crafted how we view Hadrian's Wall. And for me, what Jessie actually did is she allowed me to view the wall through the eyes of other people than archaeologists. So for my career, I've always known it as Hadrian's Wall and as a scheduled monument. What Jessie did is said, no, there's a whole other world there. There's a world where people live and engage with this actual monument. And that's what I experienced. I experienced this other world wall. Okay, so Gary Pickles keeps talking to me about trees on the wall and how important all the vegetation is and the ecology actually around it. And I find this bit of the wall that I absolutely love. So this is the same place. My question is this a wall? Is it a hedge? Or is it a fence? And indeed, Hadrian's Wall is all of them. because this is exactly the same location that has been used as a boundary of some sort for 2,000 years, with humans using it, utilising it, reacting to it in exactly the same way. Hadrian's Wall is actually about continuity. It's also about the dramatic, it's about movement, it's about length and time depth. So again, near Old Town, there's a beautiful stretch of wall where you actually effectively get these two hawthorn hedges either side, and the wall turns into this tunnel every year in spring, and in May it turns into a white tunnel. It's incredibly stunning. Yeah. This is probably where we get the analogy to tunnels existing in rural landscapes. The tunnel from the church to the main house normally was an avenue of trees that closes over at a certain time every year with the vegetation. And then you just get these incredible oak trees all along the wall. Just the age of these trees is extraordinary. And the conversation that they're having with the landscape is just fantastic. But it's not just the conversation you have in the rural areas of the wall. I walked through the centre of Newcastle. I was told by everybody it was a grotty walk. There's nothing to see. Why would you do it? Yeah? Well, obviously the chair of the World Heritage Site said, Neil, you're walking through the centre of Newcastle because you've got to tell everyone why it's so good. She joined me. Steve, who's in the audience, met me and joined me for a bit. And what I found was the most incredible resonance of Hadrian's Wall. So we're walking along the Rest Road and we're on the line of Hadrian's Wall. These are the garages to all the semi-detached 1930s houses along that route. These actually sit on the line of the wall. And somebody who built them in the 1930s realised they were on Hadrian's Wall and crenellated the tops of the garages. This is a 1930s house in Benwell Fort. Well, it looks uncannily like a fort to me. Again, this really interesting resonance. The architect, I believe, I would say, knew what was going on here. Again, up Benwell, this is the local C of E church. I mean, this could be a Roman bathhouse. It is absolutely Romanesque inspired architecture, built in the 1930s. Yeah, because somebody knew the conversation that was actually going on here. And then you get it everywhere else. You get names of Roman Avenue, Valham Court. You get this resonance coming through all the time, just by the sheer straightness of the road. The road is the wall. That's really, when you travel along it, you actually get to it. And then you get all the way through to Byker Wall. I mean, if the architect wasn't thinking of a Roman fort when they were actually designing the brickwork there, I don't know what they were thinking about. Byker Wall, the person knew where they were when they built that place. Yeah? And they knew the story that they actually wanted to tell. So they're actually telling the story through the very created fabric that actually comes along afterwards. And I love this concept of storytelling and what stories actually go on. So I took Sarah Moss's book with me on the walk, Ghost Wall, which is about an archaeological excavation on the wall and people starting to reimagine what that world would have been like, the world that they were actually encountering. So the wall becomes the backcloth narrative of storytelling. And so I'm starting to talk about this in terms of, I'm reading this at the moment, and one of my good friends from Historic England gives me this quote, okay, from a book, and he asked me, who's this? Who wrote this, Neil? Yeah, what's the book? The clue's in the last sentence. I turned my back on the world of sunlight and went down into the darkness. But they reckon whoever wishes to see the Roman wall along its course. And so that was it. There was I didn't know who it was. I had absolutely no idea. So I phoned my sister up and we just start Googling and we just start having this conversation and we eventually track it down to Joseph O'Neill, Land Under England, which imagines this entirely new world underneath the one we exist in, and actually starts to have this incredible conversation. But again, this becomes an interplay of narratives and storytelling, and something like the internet becomes really powerful in how you actually do that. But the wall is full of this, okay? So I visited Lanercost Priory and I saw this war memorial and I nearly cried. So in memory of two brothers who died for their country in the Great War, Hugh Vaughan Charlton, John McFarlane Charlton, they both died in 1916. And then below it, it also to their father, John Charlton, artist, born died 1917. So within 2 years, the entire male side of this family were no longer existing. The wall is littered were memorials to people who died along this place. Absolutely littered, small little temples. The conversation becomes really quite incredible. Now, I'm walking this wall whilst also thinking about the Ukraine and what's going on in the Ukraine. And of course, Hadrian's Wall was not built as a beautiful visitor attraction. Hadrian's Wall was built as a tool of oppression, if you like, by an invading army. Really interesting how we start to play that narrative into what we actually see around us today. Hadrian's Wall is not a happy place if you think of it in certain contexts. Don't get me wrong, it is beautiful, it's stunning, the footpath is absolutely fantastic. But again, you can actually start to see the resonances of the stories that are actually going on here, and the stories are about people's lives. So whilst we can't read the names of the person who might have been commemorated here, we can read the names here, and the same conversation is actually going on. And that's where this place becomes really, really powerful. And this resonance, I love this idea of resonance. It's not just in things that are built, it's in things that are falling down. So when I was talking to Hum Welfare, he took me outside and he showed me this barn. He said, "That's a lovely barn, Neil, isn't it?" I said, "Absolutely cracking barn." He said, "Why do you think it's got a crack in it?" And I said, "Would there be a ditch there, Hum?" And he said, "Yes. This is the vallum right here. And this barn is literally falling down into the vallum." So this is the archaeology of cracks. Really important. And it's there, it's right in front of you. You can read the story of what's actually going on. You might not see the archaeology immediately in front of you, but you can read what's actually going on. And again, that resonance is all that I talked about earlier when you actually go, this is in the extreme west, this is in the extreme east. Bits of the wall that aren't normally talked about because there's no visible wall. Well, no, there is visible wall. There's lots of wall. There's lots of wall story. There's lots of wall narrative. And Jessie summed this up really well. And she summed it up with the question, are you an east to wester or a west to easter? I.e., which direction do you walk the wall? Okay. Now, she is an out and out east to wester. But the really interesting thing is she started her walk on a May morning like I did, but she originally walked partially west to east because she started her journey at Newcastle train station, walked to Wallsend here, Segedunum, before turning backwards and going back the other way. Okay. But again, I love this idea that you can have an argument about which direction should you walk the wall in. Is there a right direction? Which one should you actually follow? And the story about the way they jump out with you is absolutely fantastic. So my favourite one was one day I was walking along and I was a little bit tired, and my lovely, clever Garmin watch decided to tell me that I was tired. Yeah, I was 7 days into walking Hadrian's Wall. It was blooming obvious that I was going to be tired, but my watch decided to pack up and say, no, I had to stop now and actually get some recovery time. I was very pleased about 3 days later when I'd got home. My watch actually told me that I was doing all right and I didn't need to recover anymore. But again, this narrative, this story, this way of bringing it forwards is ultimately why we've ended up here. Why this story leads us to Segedunum, leads us to today, and links us into the whole concept of exploring journeys as part of the theme of this year's festival. What is your journey? What's my journey? What's the journey of the material around us, and how does that actually work? And I just have to keep going back to this. It was the people I met on the wall that was absolutely so fascinating. These are the people who changed my perception of this place. It was nothing about these people. And I just don't think you get that by visiting somewhere for a day. This was a 9-day experience of total immersion and, pretty much hardship. Okay? And as for that footpath sign, well, I can now tell you Hadrian's Wall footpath now starts in my garden in York, because there it is. Okay, and it is actually pointing towards Hadrian's Wall. It is actually pointing north. But again, that's linked me through the story, through Andy, through Gary, through Hum, and all the people I actually met whilst I was actually walking the wall. Friends came and joined me who lived close by. Steve, Sunday morning, just was walking up behind me. I actually thought I was about to be attacked. I didn't know where I was going, and then Steve said, "Neil, it's Steve," and it's like, oh my God, wow, that's great. And he walked for an hour with me. The reason it was just brilliant, and we just talked about what this place absolutely meant. So this is my journey again. This is where I went. Two things absolutely stood out about this approach to heritage, family and archaeology and what it actually means in creating joint narratives. On my second day, I walked through Carlisle. So my first day got me to here, my second day was through Carlisle. And I spent 2.5 hours outside Carlisle Cathedral having coffee with these wonderful people here. And they were all volunteers on the revealing Roman Carlisle excavation at the cricket club that's been going on for the past 3 or 4 years. Yeah. And I'd organised, the coordinator knew I was coming, asked if anyone wanted to come and meet me. And on a Sunday morning, these people sat with me and we just talked about their experiences and archaeology for 2.5 hours. That's just amazing. Yeah. So, I don't get that from some professional archaeologists. And these people had real stories to tell. My other absolute favourite story has to relate to these 3 fine people. And I'm sorry, one of them is in the room. One of them isn't, is in Spain. So that's the chair of the World Heritage Site, Jane. This is Mark Richards. So he's an archaeologist and illustrator who's written guidebooks. And here's Abby, who is sitting in the room here. And the reason why I like these 3 people is we walked this section of Hadrian's Wall from Bird Oswald along. We did 3 miles. And I can tell you, they were the slowest 3 miles I did on Hadrian's Wall. They took us 3.5 hours, okay? Because you put these 3 people together and me, and you find you do not stop talking for 3 hours. We just talked and looked and explored. This is about art, this is about cultural meaning, this is about how important a ditch in a field can be and what it can do to you and what it can do to your soul and how you want to engage with it. And so actually, I loved these 3 because it was just the best talk ever. It made us late for absolutely everything we were supposed to be doing. But it just shows this place is about a conversation. It's about understanding that. And so where I got to on that is what it all meant for me. So I did this fundraising. The fundraising, you can still donate to it. My fundraising page is still going to be open until the end of the year. But it really is captivated by the signpost, coming to Segedunum, the idea that you can walk to Rome in 1,110 miles. It's about that level of connection. It's about that ability to walk these places and reflect on society and the world as a whole and what that might mean and how you actually put that back. But fundamentally, what this experience did for me, it changed my perception of Hadrian's Wall to the degree that I don't personally like to see it as Hadrian's Wall anymore. It's just the wall to me. It's the wall, okay? Because interestingly, Hadrian, he only visited once and there was no wall here when he was actually here, yeah? Yes, he instigated it, but actually it's been something else ever since. And indeed, when Jessie talks about the book, she always refers to it as the Roman Wall. It's only like when it becomes a monument, scheduled, state intervention, do we start referring to it as Hadrian's Wall and then applying this different set of values, which I actually am challenged by because I think those values sort of elevate it above the rest of society and the local people's values, who live on it as the wall. That's how they interact with it. And that's what it really means. So again, my big lesson is actually if you want to learn about somewhere, if you want to understand the meaning of places, you need to go and experience them in a much more immersive way than necessarily just going with a guidebook and actually looking at it. And I was just so fortunate to be able to do this, to be able to talk about it, to actually have that conversation with Amara Thornton, who was in London, yet we were tweeting each other and discussing Jessie the whole time, meeting people whose families were interwoven with that story as well, which was absolutely fascinating. And then ultimately, just to end up here and to tell you. So that's Walking Hadrian's Wall.